Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily as we are calling our reading through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 319, The Nearest Dream Recedes, Unrealized. Now, this is an important poem for a number of reasons. It brings us back to our conversation regarding Thomas Higginson. That first letter that Emily will have sent to Higginson, we were already commenting on this in previous lectures. This one of four poems that was sent to Higginson in letter 260, where Emily asked, is my verse alive? Along with poem 216, poem 318 that we just finished with, and 320 that we will follow with after this. Now, this poem was first published in the Atlantic Monthly by Higginson in October of 1891 as he was trying to comment on the poetry of Emily Dickinson. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've as well worked through the preceding 318 poems. And if you have, then you know already a little bit about Higginson. Higginson is a remarkable individual in the life of Emily Dickinson. He starts out as a radical minister after Harvard Divinity School. He once said, quote, "We need more radicalism in our religion and more religion in our radicalism," end quote. He was this iconoclastic first preacher and then, of course, writer. He wrote a famous essay for the Atlantic, and it is the reason that Emily reached out to ask him about what he thought regarding her poetry. It is here that Higginson, in a return letter, suggested that Emily should probably pay attention to the work of Whitman and forget about meter and rhyme. She responded by saying that she had never read Whitman and she didn't know his work, but that she had heard that Leaves of Grass was a quote-unquote disgrace of a book, end quote. And she said, I can't, quote, Emily said, "I can't drop the bells whose jingling cooled my tramp," end quote, in her response. Now, in many ways, this is a poem where we come back to our big five, namely the first of our big five, epistemology, and what it is that one can know, especially as it relates to epistemological certainty. The goal maybe is certainty, but rarely does it happen. And this poem may be about the frustrating pursuit of happiness or the dream, which, by the way, Emily will reference in 43 separate poems. Again, the challenge here is, how do you ever get the thing that you long for that you're not sure you'll ever actually get? We've seen this already a number of times in our earlier poems. Let's enjoy. The nearest dream recedes unrealized, the heaven we chase. Like the June bee before the schoolboy invites the race, stoops to an easy clover, dips, evades, teases, deploys, then to the royal clouds lifts his light pinnace, heedless of the boy, staring, bewildered at the mocking sky, homesick for steadfast honey. Ah, the bee flies not that brews that rare variety. We should point out that along with all these dashes that are typical Emily Dickinson, notice that final exclamation point at the end. Well, it all begins with this idea of the nearest dream here, that is to say, the important dream, the most important, we might say, nearest dream recedes. Now, what is this dream? Well, it's fairly clear that we're either talking about certain kinds of epistemological certainty or happiness, which probably is maybe the same thing. Notice right away what she says about the dream. The dream recedes, and obviously at 3a we can't help but read this and think about the great Martin Luther King Jr. and his "I Have a Dream" famous speech. The nearest dream recedes, unrealized. And I think that might be, along with homesick, the key word of this poem. I've said to you guys before, so much of Emily's work often is hinged on one important or two important words. Here, unrealized. Notice, we dream for things and then unrealized. What is that dream? Well, she calls it the heaven we chase. Go back to poem 239. Do you remember this? Heaven is what I cannot reach. Now, some have read this quite literally as heaven or the belief in afterlife. Others have seen this more as symbolic of the thing I aspire to, but I never can quite get there, and therefore unrealized and at the same time frustrating. What is that like? What is it like to want something that you cannot get? Something that is just beyond the reach? And then we go to the simile of the bee. Now this is not unusual either for us. Emily loves her referencing to bees. Notice we'll get to the honey, the steadfast honey, here at the end of the poem. But what is it like? Well, it's like a boy, a schoolboy, who is trying to catch the bee, and the bee is bopping around all over the place. Notice how the language of this poem almost has the feeling of a bee that is zigzagging back and forth, like the June bee before the schoolboy invites the race. In other words, the bee is there saying almost to the boy, schoolboy, hey, you can't catch me, you can't catch me, invites the race. Then notice, stoops to an easy clover, dips, evades, teases, deploys. See all these words that give this sense of inevitability, unrealized dreams, if you will, back to the first line. And then finally lifts his light pinnace, the only time this word gets used, a small sailboat, heedless of the boy, staring, bewildered at the mocking sky. Mocking gets used one and only one time in all of Emily's poetry, and it's right here, right now. In other words, the thing we want so desperately often will mock us. And then she'll use this word, homesick. In 9 different poems, she uses this word, homesick, for steadfast honey. Now, what is it that we long for? Well, many have read this as that epistemological religious certainty is certainly, if you read heaven as that which comes after this life, ergo religion has promised that. Emily is never totally clear. And then she uses this word, which is not so much a filler as it is maybe a sigh. It's almost like T.S. Eliot's alas in his classic Hollow Men. The bee flies not, that bruise, that rare variety. That is to say, the steadfast honey. Well, what is it that she's arguing here at 2a? I think her argument, and I think she sent this to Higginson intentionally, I think her argument is that we long for epistemological certainty, but it is so rare, it is so elusive, the way the schoolboy chases after the bee, that he never can quite catch. What we long for is steadfast honey. What we never seem to get is that. At 2b, note the meter here. The great scholar Wisher has pointed this out. Notice in lines 1 through 4, and also in lines 11 through 13, you have this kind of regular meter, but then right in the middle of the poem, you have this more like freer rhythm, that zigzagging, almost like the flight of the bee itself. And in that regards, obviously the simile of the bee is quite a profound way to play the game. At 3a, what can we relate this to? We've mentioned obviously several already, but I want to relate it to the dialogues of Plato. Think about the challenge in Republic 7 in the cave allegory. We look at shadows on the wall, we're 100% sure that they are real, only to discover that what we thought was real was in fact not real at all. And of course, we go through this process of the quest for perspicacity or insight, but realizing rarely do we ever find that insight that we long for. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, what was a time when you had to deal with uncertainty, epistemological uncertainty? That is to say, the heaven, the honey, that elusive honey, never quite came to you. And how is it that you dealt with that? I'm hopeful that reading Emily will help us along that way. Thank you.